We live in a world ruled by tyranny, where knowledge is suppressed and ignorance is glorified. A world where propaganda and misinformation travel the airways at the speed of lies. But in the midst of the violence and chaos, a great awakening is taking place. And as the media empires continue to collapse, a new network is forming. A network of truth, a network of courage, a network of awareness. Peace and greetings. You are now tuned into the Network of Awareness podcast radio station, where we examine current events, politics, health, finance, and topics of cultural relevance in America and throughout the world, while bringing you insightful interviews with guests that will both educate and inspire you. And now, your host of the Network of Awareness podcast radio station, ORRA the Informationalist.
Please just tell me what's happening to me in plain English without the mumbo jumbo.
My aura is a network full of awareness and gifts like ORRA, the Informationalist.
How you doing?
All right, peace and greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the Network of Awareness. I'm your host, or the Informationalist, and we have another bonus episode, and I have none other than fantasy novelist and a special guest for today's episode called The Power of Storytelling. And I have a storyteller, a fantasy novelist by the name of Ronald Kimmins, a family man. And we're going to have a discussion about his book. All right. And we're going to discuss his book, Den of a Wolfman, and Wild River as well. But overall, we're going to discuss, his passion for, writing and some of the reasons why he chose to go independent, and how he believes that dreams do become a reality, and much more. So without further ado, let's welcome to the show, Ronald Kimmins. Welcome to the show, Ronald.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, not a problem. And welcome to the show. Really, really excited about you coming on. So, Ronald, being a fantasy novelist is it's a pretty niche market in the writing community, right?
Yeah, and sometimes your fantasy kind of doesn't get much respect from other areas of the writing community.
Really, why is that?
Well, I'm someone in college, I actually majored. I did a double major in English and Chinese, so I studied a lot of literature in college, and I can tell you, among college professors and such, they kind of look down on fantasy a lot, and there's a reason for that, and that is that they just don't really see. I think the main thing is they don't think that fantasy writers have prose, write with prose that's on the level of other writers, like realistic fiction, and I think to some extent that is true, but I think that they're focusing on only one aspect of the writing and ignoring other aspects of it. And also, that's not even categorically true. It's true for some fantasy writers, but I think other fantasy writers have quite beautiful prose. But yeah, fantasy writers tend to focus more on world building. In order to create a fantasy novel, you have to you don't just build characters. You don't just create characters. You create an entire world. And in doing that, fantasy writers, that's just more of where their focus goes, right? And I think that because of that, they don't focus as much on the artistry of the language a lot of the time, and the genre itself just lends itself more to that. Like, you have to spend more time on exposition maybe than you would in a work of realistic fiction, because people already know the world, they already know the background, right? You don't have to go and explain all these little details and things to get them caught up so they understand what's going on, right? So it's what fantasy writers are fundamentally doing is different. And I think a lot of time what happens is they're being judged by a standard that they shouldn't be judged by, because it's a different thing that they're doing altogether, compared to realistic fiction. And of course, not being judged by a relevant standard, they tend to be judged rather harshly according to that standard.
Do you think George Lucas was one of those people that was judged quite harshly?
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, Lucas, I mean, I see Lucas as a genius. I have my qualms about Star Wars before and after he sold the rights, but I think he's definitely a genius in various ways. And I think that as a storyteller, he's a very capable storyteller. And yeah, I could go off on tangent of what I think of George Lucas, but yeah, it's the simple answer is yeah. I think that he's been judged harshly, and I think that he's a genius, and he doesn't deserve to be judged as harshly as he has often been. But you know what? When people are really successful, I think that any imperfections that they have tend to be overstated by others who would like to be as successful as them.
Yeah, those are called haters.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're always looking for, because of that animosity and jealousy and envy, they're just looking for any little thing that they can possibly criticize. And that's just the way of this world, especially in this country, especially. I mean, I think this country does it the most out of any other place around the world. Now I know that you had mentioned that ever since you were a little kid, you always were into writing, always daydreaming about stories and creating certain ideas and putting them on paper and creating these different realities in your mind to eventually becoming a novelist. But it wasn't always like that once you became an adult, right? So you did start a family. um it says you got into website content. So can you talk a little bit of what that was like? Because what I want the listeners to kind of get from your story as well is that whatever dream you may have or passion to do something, it doesn't always start out like that. Once you
Right.
become an adult and you got to pay bills, and in
Yeah.
your situation, not only did you have that factor in, but you started a family, so you have the responsibility of raising a family, being a married man, then having children, so on and so forth, right? So, what was that like in the beginning of being a website content creator and also translating foreign languages? How many languages do you speak actually?
So I'm fluent in Mandarin. I can speak pretty well in Spanish. I'm conversational in Spanish, and then I can read pretty well in Portuguese and Indonesian. And so I've actually translated from all of those languages to English. And I know a little Arabic. I can kind of read Arabic, not too well though. I'm still working on that one.
So it sounds like you speak what, about 4 languages?
Something like that, varying degrees. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. So what was it like having that passion and having to put it on hold to, raising a family, getting married, and having a job that not maybe that you wasn't as passionate about as than becoming a novelist? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so I graduated from college in 2009, and I also got married right at that time, like right after I graduated. And my wife is Brazilian, and at that time she was on a student visa. She couldn't legally work here, so I was a breadwinner. I was graduated. Okay, time to make money, right?
Right.
And I couldn't get a job. Everyone had told me like, oh, you're fluent in Mandarin, you're going to have so many opportunities. None of those people had any idea what they were talking about. I found out that if you're already competitive for C-level executive positions, then being fluent in Mandarin is really good. But I wasn't, so it didn't really help me that much. So I started off. I was writing a lot of website content, just like kind of helping people to just put articles and things on their websites, blog posts and stuff. And back in those days, SEO was a lot more of a blunt force initiative, and I help people to write kind of low level SEO generating articles and things like that. But then from that, I moved on to getting translation work. I started doing a lot of document translation, and I enjoy that. Still not my favorite thing. Throughout this whole process, I kind of felt like I was pounding rocks. Didn't like it very much. I really had to grind to make ends meet. I ended up going and getting an MBA, and I still didn't get the kind of job I was looking for, and ended up going and working at a translation company, which was fine. It was a decent job, but it wasn't. I was about as high as I was going to get in that industry, and I worked there for 3 years. And while I was doing that, I was researching different things about digital marketing, and I had tried multiple small entrepreneurship attempts, and I tried to start my own business a few times. Like I tried to start a Chinese school and teaching people Mandarin and stuff like that. None of that went over well, and the main reason was I was terrible at marketing. So I studied marketing while I was working at that job, and then at one point I just came home and I told my wife, I want to be an entrepreneur. And so she said, okay, I'll help you. And so we started our own digital marketing agency, and and we kind of had to change direction a couple of times, but it ended up with us focusing on helping people with info products to sell their info products online, usually through Facebook ads and things like that. And yeah, and that agency, we still have that now, but my wife is kind of taking that over, and it's kind of become her thing, and I'm stepping away and focusing on my writing, on being a novelist, because that's what I've always wanted to do. And she's excited for that because she's a big fantasy fan. She likes to read it. She wants to read what I can write, and so she's been very supportive of that. And that's where we are now.
Well, that's great. I mean, yeah. So based on you doing the digital marketing, you were helping other entrepreneurs get their
Right.
products off. So that kind of inspired you to say, hey, let me become an entrepreneur myself, but pursue my passion and what I want to sell, which is my stories, my fantasy novels, right? Okay, great. Yeah.
Now you asked about when I was a kid, right? I didn't really say anything about that.
Yeah, if you want to talk about that,
yeah, so,
what kind of inspired that as a child for you to even want to get into writing?
Yeah, so it's like when I was a kid, my parents had 9 kids, have 9 kids, big family, and my dad was not entrepreneur, and he was doing pretty well, but then that kind of just crashed and burned all of a sudden, and we ended up we moved out into the country, and literally living on a dirt road, living in a camping trailer, and slowly building a house beside the camping trailer, and building it ourselves mostly. And we didn't have much money, but we had the land was cheap, so we had 20 acres, and we had a little ravine going through the land back behind our house and stuff. So we would go outside and play. Me and my siblings, we go outside and play, and it's very imaginative. We're very imaginative kids, and we had hardships, but we also had many opportunities to express ourselves through imaginative play and through by creating things. I would write stories in spiral notebooks. I seldom finished them, but I would start them, and I would go and my mother would be in the kitchen washing dishes or whatever, and I would go and talk to her about what I was thinking, stories I was coming up with, and that's pretty good description of what my childhood was like. In fourth and fifth grade, when I was a kid, my school had competitions to write books, right? And both years I won the award for the best book written, and that was a big deal for me, very meaningful for me. And after that, I always wanted to write novels, write books, but I knew that it wasn't an easy way to earn a living, right? I knew that most authors don't make very much money. Some make a lot, most don't make very much. And so I just never saw it. It was always something I kind of wanted to do, kind of in my spare time, but it was not something that I really thought that I could seriously pursue. But now it's just that now that we've built our business up to where it is, and now that my wife is kind of taking over that, I have the space to do that, and I'm finally able to pursue that. I know some other people pursue this just as a part-time thing, like at night and stuff. I haven't really been able to do that, because I have 5 kids. I spend time with my kids. I spend time with my wife, and I just don't like to go in the evenings and just after working all day to go in the evenings and close myself in and work on a book it's not really something that has worked for me in my life, right? But now this is basically what I'm doing. This is what I do for work now. So I'm finally able to dedicate myself to this, and it's great. I love it.
Well, I think that your story is very important for people who may have some doubts or have some roadblocks that they think are insurmountable or that they're not possible, because a lot of times we get caught up in working and not really pursuing what we
Right.
love to do, opposed to what we think we need to do, and then what we need to do winds up becoming all we do, and then we don't do anything else. So I think your story is very important for people to listen to, because where there's a will, there's a way. And you found a way, especially, having 5 children, that's a lot of work,
Yeah.
even if you have a wife and help, it's not an easy thing to do. And you found a way to do it. And it took some time, but the good thing is that you made it there, and now you're doing it. So let's talk about the type of mind you have to create these fantasies, right? Because fantasy novels can be anything, right? It can take place in outer space, it can take
Right.
place in the past, in some future society, modern day society. The the level of characters that can be described in these types of novels is endless when it comes to the character descriptions and all of that stuff. So we're gonna go in order, right? I want to go in the order of your prequel and then your actual fantasy novel.
Right.
So your prequel is called the Den of a Wolfman,
Yeah. Den of the Wolfman.
and
Yeah.
it's it's a novella. And by the way, for the listeners, this is going to be available for a free download on the description page for this episode, called The Power of Storytelling. And you'll be able to click on it at www.ronaldkimmins.com forward
Ronald M.
slash
RonaldMKimmins.com. Sorry.
oh, sorry, ronaldmkimmins.com forward slash free dash novella. And in this novella, it's a prequel to your actual fantasy novel, which is called Wild Rivers.
Right.
Wild River.
Right.
And Riverman, it's like he says, you tap into the hidden powers to track down a serial killer known as Wolfman, but he must be careful not to lose himself in the process.
Yeah.
So can you let the listeners know a little bit about this so they can, get an idea of what this prequel's all about? Because you did say it takes place in the 1800s, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantasy world. It's not on Earth. It's a different world, but it's very similar to Earth, and it's based on like an 1860s America uh, environment. It's very similar to that. Like right after this American Civil War, there's a city called Wild River. And Wild River is based on, it's kind of a mix of New Orleans and New York.
Now, is
And
this like on a different planet?
yeah, different planet, different world altogether. It's just, but it's very similar to 1860s America.
Okay.
And yeah, it's there's magic, but it's kind of low key magic. It's very subtle. And there are different kinds. People have in my world, for the most part, people with magical abilities, it's hereditary, and they're able to do kind of like maybe one or two specific things. And there are different kinds of things that people may have depending on their ancestry. And the main character,
and that's tapping into hidden powers, right?
yeah, the main
Okay.
character, Bandas Riverman. So he was born a slave, and he saw the ending of slavery in that part of the world. But it didn't exactly end, because there's still what we would call indentured servitude, where people can like sign contracts and they basically become a slave for however long the contract lasts. And of course, back in our history, in American history, that was done. Like a lot of, for example, a lot of Irish people did that, where they were basically treated same as slaves. It's just that they had a certain term that would end. And in this world, that is still going on.
Now, did you follow the traditional guidelines of what happened actually in real life here when it comes to slavery, or did you add a different type of element? And what I mean by that is like, did this man Bandus Riverman, is he considered a black man, or is he some other type of ethnicity?
So physically, he looks like what we would describe as like maybe like an Arab or a Latino. He's kind of a middle, kind of a medium brown color skin.
Okay.
And he has orange eyes. But the slavery in this world is actually not race based. It's just more. It's more like what it was in the Roman Empire,
Well,
where
it's like how it used to be before the United States.
before the Atlantic slave trade. Yeah, and
Yeah,
basically, if you get captured and someone says you're a slave, then you're a slave, and that's
that's
that,
it.
and
That's
your
it.
children will be
Yeah.
slaves unless you can buy their way out of slavery or whatever. And in this world, the slaves have they're tattooed, which was also a common thing in the ancient world. But they have tattoos on their hands to show they're slaves. And Bandas Riverman, he's freed now. He's a free man, but as a free man, he's still living with these tattoos on his hands, right? That still mark him, and there's still this social, this subtle social taboo about that, about you can still see who was and was not a slave, even though slavery has ended. So anyway, Bandas, his special ability, and I don't want to give away too much, but he's
Right.
he's what you call a seer. He's clairvoyant in certain ways, and this helps him this is one of the reasons why he became an investigator, a private investigator, because that ability helps him in his investigations. Like he specifically has something called clairtangency, where if someone was murdered using a knife, he can touch the knife and sort of relive the moment of the murder. Any strong emotions or strong memories attached to an object, he can touch the object and feel that. And that's his special power. And there are other kinds of people in the world that have other special powers, but that's how he is. Now there's, in the novella Den of the Wolfman, there's a serial killer who's going around and brutally murdering people in Wild River. And for some reason, a local tycoon gets interested in this, and he comes and hires Bandas Riverman to go catch the serial killer. Even though the cops are after the serial killer, he goes and specifically hires Bandas to go after him. And that's when the story starts in the novella. And the reason for the tycoon getting into it, you don't really understand it so much until later on in the novel. But yeah, so he has to go after the serial killer who himself has certain special abilities, and he has to find him before he kills again.
Now, before we go into the actual novel, that this is just a prequel to the actual novel. Where does the inspiration for this type of scenario come from? Where you come up with these ideas like inheriting certain powers, having it as indentured servitude, and the character coming from that type of background, and all of these different elements. Like, where does the inspiration for you to put this on paper come from?
Oh, just a lot of different places. I mean, I'm a big fan. In fantasy, there are kind of two kinds of magic that you see. You have hard magic and soft magic. Soft magic is more like what you see in Tolkien, maybe Terry Brooks. It's there really aren't that many limitations to it. It's just kind of there. Harry Potter is another soft magic element. Like you never really know what element of magic they're going to bring into the story now, because there aren't any real clear limitations, right? Whereas hard magic is more like Brandon Sanderson. If anyone's read Brandon Sanderson, he's a big fan of hard magic, and so am I, because I feel that it creates more of a sense of what the limitations are and what the risks are, the hazards, and what the character's abilities are. So I like that better. So I need to find a way to have some sort of limitation, right, on the magic system. And what I chose in this one was through heredity, and to make it a matter of parentage. And that works with the themes of the story, because the story does talk a lot about like class conflict and things like that. And it kind of feeds into that narrative of class conflict. But there are other ways that you can do a hard magic system, but that's the one that I chose. As far as this exact setting, like the 1860s setting, the funny thing is, see, the first book that I wrote was not Wild River. The first book that I wrote, it was a nonfiction book. It's actually on Amazon. It's called The Struggle of All Ages, and it's about Joseph Smith's prophecy of the American Civil War. He said that the American Civil War would happen back in 1832, and he gave certain detail. He gave there's about 6 main points that he said, things that he said would happen. Like he said, the North and South would fight against each other, and it would be largely because of slavery, and he said that that the South would appeal to Britain for help. He said that the first battle would be in South Carolina. All that happened, right? And anyway, so I wrote a book talking about that, and in doing that, I had to research a lot about that period. And so I had just finished writing that book, and I said, okay, I want to write a fantasy novel now. And I had already mapped out kind of thousands of years of history for this fantasy world, and I wanted to write stories at different points in the history of this world. And I had initially intended to write my first one in kind of a medieval period, because that's kind of what fantasy tends to be, right? But because I had just done all this research on 1850s, 1860s, I said, well, that's what I know right now, so I'm going to focus on that period. And so that's what I did. I ended up writing Wild River.
Let's talk about your research, because I wanted to talk about that. Do you ever really go deep into researching for ideas, maybe traveling to certain places? Do you do any type of what I would consider niche research, where you do certain things like go places to try to build on whatever ideas you come up with and gain certain knowledge to fit the themes of these novels?
So I haven't done any traveling as research. I've done a lot of traveling, and that has definitely influenced my writing. Like I was missionary in Taiwan for 2 years. I lived in Chile for a year. I lived in
Oh
Brazil
yeah.
for a few months. Yeah, I lived in Brazil for a few months. I've lived in different parts of the U.S. I want to go to a lot of other places, and I intend to. I've been to Mexico, and yeah, my traveling has definitely influenced me, but more in the sense of just helping me to kind of understand other cultures and how
Right.
cultures can be different.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you see that a little bit in Wild River. Like there's a little bit of like Eastern philosophy in Wild River that's come into that. But as far as research, but I do a lot of research as far as reading books on all kinds of different things. I'm a kind of guy. I'm curious about just about everything. Like you look at my bookshelf, I have like all kinds of stuff. I'm looking over here, like I have a Fabric of the Cosmos right beside a book about the Crusades. It's anything and everything interests me, and it all influences my writing. But specifically, yeah, because I was writing about the book about the Civil War in that period. I did a lot of serious research for that specific period. I didn't like go to any Civil War battlefields or anything like that, for research, but I definitely read a lot of books, and like I said, my travels have definitely influenced my writing and who I am.
In your travels, is there any particular one place that has left you in awe, opposed to any other places that you've been around in the world? Is there one that you can pinpoint that really, like, when you were there, you were really in awe of the landscape, the culture, the people?
Taiwan's like a second home to me. And it's been a while since I've been there. I want to go back soon. I would have gone back in 2020, but then COVID hit and everything was shut down and I couldn't go anywhere. But yeah, Taiwan's like a second home to me. And I think Taiwan is actually largely underrated
Hmm.
in the West. I think a lot of Americans don't even know the difference between Taiwan and Thailand, um, and don't really know much about Taiwan at all. Taiwan is a beautiful place. It's a safe place. It's they have great beaches. They have mountains. It's and culturally it's very interesting because you have this mix of the dominant Chinese culture there with the Aboriginal culture. The original inhabitants of Taiwan are they're the Filipinos came from Taiwan, from that area. Like there was a diaspora going from Taiwan throughout Southeast Asia and those islands there, but that originated from Taiwan. And to see that mixture of culture there, different kinds of Chinese cultures in Taiwan, but also the Yuanzhumin, the Aborigines, who are very much like Native Americans, and that's very interesting. And Taiwan's just a beautiful place. I rode my bike around the cities, and I was also in the more rural areas. Up riding around in the hills and looking over rice paddies and everything. It's very picturesque in many places, and I'd very much like to go back, and I intend to go back soon.
Well, the good news is that COVID-19 is no longer considered an emergency health issue.
Right.
And now it's not declared that by the World Health Organization. So that's going to be changing up a lot of different things that were being done because of that. So that
Yeah,
just
that's
happened on Friday.
Yeah, and that's not now, as far as Taiwan specifically. Now the issue is China, because China's been doing a lot of saber rattling, and we don't really know what they're going to do. As far as Xi Jinping has basically said that he intends to invade Taiwan,
Right.
and I know that there was a rumor that supposedly he had told last year Putin that he intended to invade Taiwan, in the end of 2022. Of course, he didn't do that. I don't know if he was just playing Putin, if he was serious, but then he backed off when he saw, how things didn't go well for Putin in Ukraine, or if that was just all made up. I don't know, but he has said that he wanted to see the reunification of Taiwan happen while he was in charge of things. So So we don't really know what's going to happen. I think that what's most likely to I don't think he's ever going to invade Taiwan, but I do think it's rather likely that he will try to blockade it and use the blockade to force Taiwan into submission. And yeah, being there, if at that time when that's going on, could possibly be very problematic. So that has been affecting my plans. I keep looking at the events going on and saying, I want to go back to Taiwan. I want to go back to Taiwan, but I don't know when that's going to happen.
Well, let's talk about what's going on real quick, because for me, it's never a dull moment, not just here in the United States, but really around the world these days, especially after COVID or during COVID, because the pandemic, I call it, after the pandemic came into play, so many things have been happening in this world from day to day, and it's just never been a dull moment because there's so much to discuss. So many journalists have things to write about and how the world is changing, from economics to agriculture to medicine to industry, um, pharmaceuticals, you name it. There's something changing, from transhumanism to uh, cultural awareness, self awareness, spirituality. I mean, just so much going on. And with all that going on, I'm wondering, before we start talking about this novel, um, is this are these events that are currently taking place and have been for the past 3 years now and counting? Have they been giving you like, have they been influencing you for you to create a new type of novel based on everything that's happened?
I mean, there's definitely influence there, and
Yeah.
and it's something that I think about a lot. I'm what you would call a classic liberal. I'm I
What is that, by the way, for those that don't know? Because
it's
there's
not
all
what
these different.
Americans think a liberal is. It's
So, what's a classic liberal?
I would say like a kind of a moderate libertarian. You know, um, Someone who thinks government should exist, but does not trust government, and is a big believer in limited government and checks and balances. Um,
Okay.
and and who does not think that government, that more laws, that more force from the government is the solution to every single problem that exists.
Right.
um so so yeah, this question, and that's actually something interesting. That's actually something I talk about in my first book, in The Struggle of All Ages. Even though it was about the Civil War, I talk about in the book how the implications of the Civil War, it's come down to today, and how that was kind of the first phase of something that has continued to today. Because when you look at like war scholars, they'll tell you that the American Civil War was the first modern war, and there are many reasons for that. One reason is the technology. Like this was the first war where both sides extensively used railroads. First war, both sides used telegraphs. Both sides used aerial reconnaissance. Both sides used submarines. On and on and on. But it was also the first modern war, or at least it was the beginning of a modern age of warfare in terms of ideology. Like, people talk about the American Revolution and how that was the shot heard around the world, right? How this was the beginning of resistance to monarchy and to colonialism. But the thing is that led to a certain era of revolution that didn't actually accomplish very much throughout a lot of the world. Like, the Europeans were trying to advance liberal ideologies, overthrow the monarchies and stuff, but they weren't too successful. And then when the American Civil War happened, see, that was a matter of global importance, because this nation was seen as kind of the hallmark of these new liberal values, right? This nation was proof that monarchs were not needed and that people could self-govern. and the monarchs of Europe were looking on and seeing what was happening here and saying, see, this is proof that it doesn't really work, right? And the liberals in Europe were looking over here and saying, and just cheering for the North and saying, this needs this, because they saw this as ground zero for a global struggle between statism and liberalism. And it was. And since that time, when you look at every major conflict that has happened, the ideology underlying every single major conflict has been largely centered around this philosophical conflict of statism versus liberalism. Before the American Civil War, it was more like, oh, we fight for our country, we fight for our monarch. Is a matter of, you have something we want, or we have something you want, therefore we're fighting. But it wasn't so much a matter of like universal ideology. And people would fight for freedom, but they fight for their own freedom. They wouldn't fight for other people's freedom because it wasn't understood to be a universal concept. But now in this age, this idea, these basic liberal values of a basic equality among people, of resisting statism, resisting authoritarianism, these ideas are largely accepted throughout the world. And there are people who fight against them. And that's why virtually every major conflict has had that ideological basis of statism versus liberalism, even when it's just lip service. Like a lot of the time they're just, it's people pretending to fight for so-called democracy or whatever, and they're not really, but still the ideology is there.
Right.
And that's continuing today, and it's becoming more and more meaningful because what's happening now is technology is advancing to the point where it allows for a certain level of surveillance and control beyond anything that has ever been seen in the past. Like back in the 1800s, what the Tsar of Russia would do to control his people is he would control who could or could not use the railroad, right? But and that in itself was a pretty significant exercise of power, and it had an effect. But now we're at the point where government wants to be able to control what you can buy, where you not just whether or not you can use the train, but whether or not you can walk in a certain place.
They want to control every aspect of our lives.
Yeah. And the thing is, a lot of it really is well intentioned.
You think so?
A lot of it, I think most of the people out there who are advocating these things, you can find no shortage of people advocating statism, advocating more and more and more government control. Those people aren't tyrants. They are tools of tyrants. But they don't realize what they're really advocating. See, so I don't see, that's for the most part, I don't see all this happening as a result of some grand plan, but it is happening, and people in power will do whatever they can to maintain and increase their power. And if you have this new technology that allows them to go and surveil people, to micromanage their lives, then they will take that. They will use that. Of course they will. There's a great book called Weapons of Mass Destruction. Have you heard of it?
Yes.
It's a great book, and she talks about how algorithms are taking over our lives. And a lot of the time, it's not like there's not malice there, but it's still being done. And people are doing it without realizing the consequences. She talks about a teacher in I think it was in Dallas. I'm not sure. She was a great teacher by anyone who knew her would have said she was a great teacher. She actually got an award for being a great teacher. And then the next year, she was fired. Why? Because this performance algorithm determined that she was not a good teacher. But the thing is, some people tried to investigate that and say, okay, according to what standard are you saying that these people who are being fired are not good teachers? And the thing is, they could not look at the algorithm. They were not allowed to, because the algorithm was proprietary. It was owned by a company that, if they showed people the ins and outs of the algorithm, then that's, giving away their proprietary, they're giving away what they supposedly produce that's of value, right? And so they wouldn't do that. So in the end, people were being judged by something that they could not scrutinize. And we're putting ourselves under the control of things that we're not allowed to control ourselves. Like there's no check and balance there. It's just, and it's almost, and she talks about this in the book, how it's almost this to the point of being religious. Like it's this religious thing where you say, like, oh, we don't understand it. We don't understand the algorithm because it's beyond our understanding. Even if we were to see the nuts and bolts of it, we wouldn't understand it. It's too complex. It's too far above us. But it's always going to be right because it is impartial, whereas humans are partial. And one thing she talks about in the book is that the thing is that algorithm was created by humans, and so all that ends up happening is that they take whatever biases they have, the creators have, and they bake it into the algorithm, and then they just multiply that. So this thing that's supposed to be impartial actually is not. And it's certainly far from perfect, but we're taking these algorithms and we're putting them in charge of hiring and firing. We're putting them in charge of making decisions of whether or not someone should get a loan, and so on and so forth. And these big life decisions are no longer being made by humans. And we assume that these creations of ours are smarter than we are, when they're not, and we're not. Since we're not allowed to scrutinize them, it's a very dangerous thing because we're giving them all this power, and there's no check or balance against that power.
Yeah, that's something that's going on a lot in the United States right now. When it comes to fantasy novels, a lot of times there is no difference between the fantasy and the reality, because a lot of times something can be created as a fantasy, but we can start to see it play itself out in reality. And a good example of that, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is the novel of The Hunger Games, that was turned into a movie. Now, based on my research, for the past 20 years, much of what is written in The Hunger Games, that it goes more in depth than what the actual movie shows, is actually starting to play itself out. Especially when it comes to taking everything you possibly can from the people and creating a very poor part of society and creating a very elite high society, and not no middleman, no middle class. It's just extreme poverty, and all that being controlled and being sectioned off into districts like it is in the Hunger Games. And then, of course, the wealthy people get to travel and do certain things that the poor people don't. So these are actual things as far as government agenda here in the United States and in other parts of Western civilization, where they have these agendas in place written on paper as far as sectioning zones and districts. And then you're also starting to see right now presently where they're contaminating the air, and allegedly the purpose for that is that there's going to be certain areas of the United States and of Western civilization when it comes to Canada and Mexico that are going to be uninhabitable, where we won't be able to live there. You have these things called smart cities that are now starting to take place. So when I think about the Hunger Games, it's all coming into alignment with reality. Something that was written as a fantasy and was a nice epic saga of fantasy literature is now becoming slowly but surely a reality here, especially in the United States. So I wanted to get your take on that, where sometimes the line between reality and or should we say fiction fantasy is kind of meshed in together to where we actually start to experience the fantasy, and then the reality becomes more fantasy and the fantasy becomes more reality.
Well, yeah, and that's that's a scary thing when you start to see
Yes, it is.
the certain elements of dystopian stories just becoming real. And unfortunately, I haven't actually read Hunger Games. I saw the films. I'm sure the books are great. I haven't read them yet. Um, but uh, but but yeah, and when I know, like, one time I told a friend that I really liked Fahrenheit 451. I said it was a very accurate portrayal of what's happening in the world. And my friend was like, "Well, that's ridiculous. Nobody's trying to ban all books." And that's the thing. He didn't really understand what I was saying. Like I don't actually. I'm not saying that that's what happened in Fahrenheit 451. That exact story is going to happen. And it's like you're not saying that the Hunger Games is going to happen, but what you're saying is the general philosophical uh, argument that's being made is pretty accurate.
Well, let me
Because
say this. When it comes to the Agenda 21 documentation, it really looks no different than what they show you in Hunger Games,
as far
especially when it
as
comes to
what,
these zones, because they
oh
are
yeah,
building technology for these major railways to transport people, which is called these super bullet trains
hmm
that would trans people to certain districts, and the districts are zoned. This is actual reality. So this is actually documented government documents that in the United States that you're going to have a zone like here where I'm at in Florida, which would be the southeast, and then you have a zone in the northeast, and then you would have a zone in the north and midwest. You would have about a couple of zones in the West Coast. So this is actual documented stuff that they're working towards, especially when it comes to the 17 sustainable goals that they have in place, which are all in alignment of this Agenda 21, also known as Agenda 2030, where it's consolidating the people into certain districts and having complete and utter control of everything they do, from the way they spend money, which right now they have this thing called Fed Now, which is Fed Link, which they want to do away with PayPal, Cash App, and all these other ways, and have us literally make payments through one governed system. This is real stuff that's happening right now and being put into place. So w- this type of stuff is not so much fantasy now, because these are real people with real power putting these initiatives in place to be, made a reality here. Especially here in the US. We're starting to see it a lot. And COVID really propelled a lot of that stuff, right? So that's why I'm bringing this conversation up, because all these things are really happening. So what I am saying is that yes, this stuff is happening. They are having a Hunger Games scenario start to play itself out in increments. Um,
and I think that in resisting statism and resisting those who constantly seek power over others, these tendencies, these overstep, these instances in which people in power overstep the boundaries of what they should be able to do. I think that a big mistake that people often make is to make this about ideology, and to act as if those people who are taking these actions are trying to advance some specific ideology as opposed to other kinds of ideology. And when in reality, um, they don't really care about ideology so much as they just care about power. You know,
oh yeah, it sounds like your microphone went out. Well, while Ronald, by the way, I can't hear you. It sounds like your microphone went out for a second. So it's on mute right now.
I
There
am
you go.
back.
Okay, great.
Sorry about that. My
You well,
phone was
let me
connected.
let me introduce this to you. I understand where you're coming from, but Ronald, based on my research, they are looking to control the world, and there are hidden powers.
Oh yeah, I
They're
definitely
hidden
see
forces. Like
people seek control. Yeah, definitely.
look at the recently, I think it was sometime last year, the Georgia Guidestones were blown up. Nobody knows how this happened. This is something that's been guarded for quite some time. But in the Georgia Guidestones, right? has all this Masonic literature on it, has Masonic symbolism, and the very first law or commandment of these new laws and initiatives that want to be put in place is lower down the population under 500 million to be completely controlled in all aspects. So when you see stuff like that,
So
and
wait.
you
So the
seeing
guide
things played,
stones. So you're saying
yeah,
the guide stones are to go under 500 million, and the guide stones were destroyed.
recently, but these
Yeah.
guidestones were up for more than almost, I would say, about 20 years.
So who? And you said we don't know who destroyed them.
We don't know who destroyed them, but we don't even know how they got there. This is what's interesting.
Right.
Is that the government doesn't know how it got there, but yet it got protected from being destroyed. And just last year, it did get blown up. But when you think about these plans for this alleged, I have to say this because this goes to YouTube, so I don't want to get flagged. But for this alleged depopulation plan, and you see something like a pandemic that's taken millions of people's lives, and you see all these other different initiatives by government to have this alleged depopulation plan that's actually a reality now, you have to ask yourself, is there, when you look at the Georgia Guidestones, is there some truth to this when it's playing itself out that the powers that shouldn't be are actually presenting this as a positive thing? And I'll give you a perfect example. Bill Gates, for the past 15 years, has been talking about how they were going to depopulate the planet and how they were going to be successful at it because they've been successful at it through medicine. And then he talked about depopulating populations of human population because there's too many people consuming the world, to do it through what I call the science appliance, which is those things that people been putting in their arms that supposedly protect them from illness and sickness and from dying. And this man has publicly stated that doing that very thing would bring down the population by 25%. So you have to ask yourself, if these are real initiatives that are being put and have been successful, and you look at something like the Georgia Guidestones, and also just the overwhelming amount of evil that's been going on in the world, where human life is not valued by the people that are in power. That has been proven time and time again. I mean, even during slavery was a prime example of how life, didn't matter because people were being treated less than cattle. So now we're here in well into the 21st century, and we're still seeing that play out. So this is what I was talking about when it comes to the Hunger Games, is that something that is considered fantasy is now becoming more of a reality, and you can't really tell the two from each other.
And one of the reasons that I write fantasy, and that people like fantasy, I think, and one of the advantages of fantasy is that it allows us to take real issues, and put them in a different setting.
Right.
And that allows us to look at them with more objectivity.
Yes, I agree.
Like, say, like when you look at them in the real world, you may be like, have this tendency of going, well, I want to criticize people who belong to this certain group, advocate this certain thing, but my aunt is one of those people, so I don't really want to do that, But when you put it into a new setting where all those connections are fictional, then you're more able to see it for what it is, right? And that being the case, I think it's very important to look at fiction, to take fantasy, science fiction as a way of learning important lessons and seeing our reality for what it is. Humans are humans in all eras and in all settings, and if you see things, and so if we see things playing out kind of the way they did in Hunger Games, then the existence of Hunger Games helps us to more clearly understand what the problems are, what the risks are, and be able to address them. Regarding what I said before though about like ideology, is that I'm sure some people, very powerful people, have ideologies, but insofar as they have ideologies, they also have conflicts with each other, ideological conflicts with each other.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
they will still work together at times, right? And and as far as ideology, like I think the clearest example of what I'm talking about is like you look at, of course this is cliche, but look at Adolf Hitler. You ask like, well, was Adolf Hitler a Christian? Yes, but no. In the sense that like he grew up in a Christian environment, he came from that background, and he had no problem incorporating Christianity into his socio-political narrative as much as possible. Why? Because he knew that the people he wanted to influence were Christians. But at the same time, he expressed to people close to him how much he wished that Europe had been, or that Germany had been Muslim instead of Christian, because he felt that, at least according to him, this is a matter of debate, but according to him, Islam was more, it fit more with his socio-political philosophy than Christianity is. So was he really a Christian? Like, not really, but yes, but no. In the end, what he was Adolf Hitler, and he was willing to use whatever ideology the lower people had and twist it to be whatever he wanted it to be. And that's what we see a lot. I think when you look at all of the useful idiots, the people up high, the people in power, like they're willing to champion whatever narrative will get them what they want, right?
Right.
And I was just talking about how my book is about class struggle, and class struggle is a very real thing. It's something that I'm concerned with, that the people should be concerned with, but I'm completely opposed to Marxism, which is all about class struggle, right? And Marxists have long been very happy to latch onto class struggles. And you see what they do when Marxists are trying to get into power is they inflame that. They intentionally try to get the different classes that they see more and more opposed to each other. Why? Because as long as they're fighting each other, they aren't fighting the real enemy, right? And so that's kind of what I meant by using ideology. The people who seek more power, they're willing to use whatever ideology is beneficial to them. They'll pose as whatever you want. They'll be environmentalists. They'll be social conservatives. They'll be whatever they need to be to get more power, and they'll say whatever they need to say. And what we need to do is look past that and realize that what's happening is that they're just pitting us against each other. And that's why when people ask me about my political positions in the U.S., I say like, I'm anti-major party. That's what I am. I'm anti-major party. I think my main political position is I want election reform. We need to change the way that we elect people. As long as we don't do that, we will continue to have these two major parties in power who advocate, pay lip service to all kinds of ideologies that sound great, but in the end, that's not really what they care about. In the end, what they care about is power.
Right.
And
they never follow through on their lip service.
Yeah. They these problems that they talk about, they could solve a lot of the time, but they don't, because that's how they got elected, and they don't know how to get elected without those problems. So they want those problems to continue.
Right.
Whether you're talking about illegal immigration or environmental issues or corruption in government, people, Hillary Clinton. I loved it. Hillary Clinton, when she ran for president, she went on stage and she told us that big pharma is the enemy. She told us that super PACs are destroying our political system. She told us that Wall Street is destroying the economy. And then what did she do? She accepted more money than anyone else from big pharma from Wall Street through super PACs, you know, and I bring this up with her supporters, and they say like, oh, but you know, she wasn't influenced by it. Really? Why would they keep giving Democrats money if Democrats are not being influenced by their money, right? Why do they keep doing it year after year after year, right? And like I said, I'm not a Republican. I used to be. I'm not. I'm very much anti-major party because I see this, and both parties do this, and it needs to end. This is the only way we can get anywhere is through election reform.
Well, let's talk about your novel. Let's talk about Wild River. That's available on Amazon.com under /Wild-River New World Trilogy, and that link would be in the description box as well for all the listeners. It says in a young city thriving under massive immigration and industrial revolution, a seemingly inconsequential factory worker who has gone missing. And it says when multiple influential people come to the investigator Bandas, who's the main character, Bandas Riverman, and ask him to find her, his investigation soon becomes the focal point of a looming conflict between powerful groups. And Bandas soon discovers that he is not only with special powers that have long been hidden from the world. So can you talk a little bit about this? Obviously not giving away the book because, you know, we want people to read this book, but talk a little bit about how you went from the prequel of this book being The Den of the Wolfman, where it's kind of like Bandits discovering these powers and tapping into them and starting to use them and get into this work of finding people like this serial killer, to going into now the novel that goes a little bit more in depth about finding this woman and stuff. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the novella, you know, is just totally focused on Bandas, but you know, Den of the Wolfman. But the novel, actually, it brings in a number of other characters, and you see, in the setting is, it's based on, you know, like I said, a mixture of New York and New Orleans, and you have a number of influential families who have gotten very rich because of the development of this new country, this new continent, and the situation here in Wild River is different from the colonization of the Americas, in that the colonizers got here and there was no one here, but they found the ruins of a civilization, but that civilization was gone. There were no natives. So it's in that sense it was different from the colonization of the Americas in our world. But these people, you know, they created cities and they started pushing into the continent, and you have these influential families that are getting rich, but they're also kind of at odds with each other, but they're also working together. Like you have one family that owns the mine, one family that owns the railroad, one family that owns the docks, and you also have this massive immigration coming into the city. All these workers coming from across the sea, from the old world, because you have people, just like with, you know, America, you have people seeking opportunity, right? But they come over here, and it's this very chaotic environment, and unscrupulous people they have a lot of opportunity to build wealth and power, and so they do. And Bandas becomes in the center of this when multiple people come to him, want him to find this factory worker who's gone missing, who seemingly was insignificant, but for some reason you have these different powerful families who are at odds with each other, who are rivals, who want to find her, and they don't tell him exactly why. And as he goes and does this, he starts to discover more and more about these families and about the forces that are at work, and also about certain transnational organizations that are kind of operating in the shadows, trying to drive the narrative and to drive history in a certain direction. and and he's discovering like the powers that are commanded by these people, and also he starts to discover some of the secrets of the ancient civilization that existed before, that was much more magical than the one that they have. They have certain great powers that are seemingly the source of their own destruction. And those powers are starting to, now these people from the old world are coming over, and they're seeking power, and they're trying to find the source of this ancient power, not thinking that it's a big deal that apparently the natives destroyed themselves with this ancient power, right? And so yeah, it's a very much a discussion of there's class struggle, there's also the question of power, seeking power, what causes people to seek power, what are the dangers of seeking power, and in all of this, maintaining a sense of dignity and humanity and goodness when you're caught up in struggles like this.
So, what is the now that how long has it been since you've written this novel? Like, how long has it been out for?
I think it's almost 2 months now.
2 months.
Almost 2 months now.
Is there any new project that you have in mind now that you've completed this task of completing this novel? Do you have another novel in mind, or are you going to take a break? Okay.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still writing. Yeah, I've actually started writing the second. This is a trilogy, and so there's a novel that comes right after this one. It just picks up where this one leaves off, and it's going to be called the Still Army.
The Stilled Army.
The Still Army, like an army. Like an army that is still,
Okay.
And it's a reference to actually an army of golems, and that's something that you see in a little bit in Wild River. That's going to be the next novel in this trilogy. I'm also working on another novel that happens in the same world, but it's farther back. It is in more of a medieval period, and it shows the origins of some of one of the one of the powerful families mentioned in Wild River, and some of and it also kind of shows the origin of the overarching conflict, because in this world there's kind of a, like with Marvel does with their movies, they have villains in all the different movies, but then Thanos was like the big villain, right? In a similar way, I have kind of a big villain that you don't even really see in Wild River, but that's going to be the rise of that villain is going to be hinted at in this other this other novel that I'm going to be that I'm working on right now.
Sounds very interesting. What's the name of the world, or is there like a star system of this world where all this takes place? Is there a name for it?
So I don't have an actual name for the world yet. I don't I don't know yet.
Okay.
We'll see. We might give it a, I'm sure that, just like us, we just called our world Earth because Earth, dirt, you're like, right? Our moon is the moon. Like that's what we call it, and they have a similar tendency, right? And just like us, they, at this point in their history, they're not thinking that much about other worlds, and therefore their world is not, the name of their world is not as much of an important thing. But yeah, I'll probably give it a name at some point, but that name is not that specific name is not given in Wild River yet.
Okay. So before we wrap things up, I just wanted to kind of see if you wanted to leave the listeners of this show called The Power of Storytelling with any final comments and things that you want to leave the listeners with on maybe why they want to read these novels, or anything else you want to discuss, and you can take as long as you want.
Just storytelling is important. Stories are important. Humans are a storytelling species. And when you look back on our history, you see the people who exercised the most power and who made the most influence were almost always people who told good stories. When you see, and I have a digital marketing agency. I know about this. Like if you want to sell something to people, you tell them a good story.
Right.
If you want people to do a certain thing, you need to tell them a good story. It's not enough to just tell people something that is true.
Right.
You need to make them feel it.
Yes.
And
I agree.
and storytelling, I mean, and of course that allows you to exercise a certain power, right? And power is not intrinsically good, it's not intrinsically bad. It's just it just is. You can use it for good, you can use it for bad. And storytelling is the same way. Ideas are important. And stories are the most powerful way of communicating ideas to people. Because in the end, humans, we use logic, we use reasoning, but when we actually make decisions, it's always primarily a matter of emotion. Our emotion, and this we talk about in business and marketing, when people buy, it's always an emotional decision. Yeah, there can be certain logical arguments that are made, but it's always an emotional decision in the end.
Right.
And and good storytelling communicates ideas in such a way that those ideas will actually mean something to people, right? And we need to understand that about ourselves. And we need to understand that if we want to influence other people, we need to be good storytellers. And also, we need to realize that anytime anyone is telling us a story, we are giving, and we're listening to that story, we're giving them the ability to influence us. And this is why political narratives are created. This is why politicians tell stories. It's because that allows them to take high level ideas and make them real to people, right? And and as a storyteller, there isn't really a specific narrative that I'm trying to push in my stories. I'm a very politically minded person, as you can tell. I think about political issues a lot, social issues and things, but in my stories, I'm not really pushing a specific narrative, and I don't start telling a story with an intention to teach a specific lesson. But I do hope that when people read my stories, that they'll be better off for it, and they'll feel enlightened, they'll feel edified, and that I will make a difference in their lives. And because, like I said, that the power to tell stories is the power to change. The only real magic in this world comes from words and symbols and the power that they have over the human mind. And of course, that's not really magic, but it's close enough. Symbols are very, very powerful things, because when you see a symbol that connects your mind to a whole set of images and events that are connected to that symbol, and that elicits certain feelings and thoughts, and that will propel you in a certain direction just from seeing that symbol, right? And yeah, in the end, I hope that again, when people read what I write, that they'll be edified, and that it will help them to deal with life, to be able to take their challenges, to take their frustrations, and put them in kind of a controlled setting where they're able to address them, and where they're able to look at them for what they are, look at them objectively. And in that way, I see my stories, hopefully, as being able to help people to improve their lives.
Absolutely. Well, this show definitely very edifying for me, and I hope that the listeners get a lot of great substance from reading your books that are available on Amazon, and the links are going to be in the description box. So, Ronald, thank you again, and stick around for a moment while I end this broadcast on the power of storytelling. So, people, um, Ronald N. Kimmons, fantasy novelist. Definitely, you can get the free novella "Den of a Wolfman" And you can get all his books, right? Not just these, but get all his books on Amazon. The links will be available on there, as well as his website. So, brothers and sisters, thank you for tuning in to this bonus episode, because we haven't started season 6 yet on the Network of Awareness. That'll be coming in the next month. I want to thank you for tuning into this power of storytelling. And when you live in the present, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning. And don't look for the light at the end of the tunnel, because the light is and always will be within you. So light up that tunnel and find your way through the darkness. This is All the Informationalists signing off with Ronald N. Kimmons, saying peace, love, and light. All praises to the Most High. And until we meet again.
Thank you.